We're going to get started here, what we're doing and what our focus is to meet the challenges in today's climate. And we're going to introduce you to our new Executive Director, Corey Rosella. She's going to be joined later on by our Director of Policy Advocacy, Brandon Green, who's going to follow up after her talk and Q&A with a deep dive into the systemic hurdles that are still in place and what we can do and what we're planning to do from Western Center and what you all can do to work together to improve the lives of all of us in the community. I'm going to just first introduce Corey, and then we'll introduce Brandon when he gets on board later on. She's a long history with Western Center, so I'm really excited to introduce her. She came here after serving as the Vice President of Programs at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Southern California, AJ SoCal. And prior to that, she worked with Western Center for many years, first as a staff attorney and then as deputy director, where she managed the litigation teams and led initiatives centering racial justice. She was a key person involved in helping to implement the expansion of Medi-Cal to undocumented youth and young adults, and was a key part of the impact team that fought to protect due process rights and Medi-Cal notices, helping hundreds of thousands of people on Medi-Cal every year to renew their coverage. So she's a powerhouse, and we're really happy to have her and to hear more of her vision and what her story is. So let's welcome Corey, and thank you for being on board.
Thank you so much, Maria. It is so great to be here. And I did the math, and tomorrow will actually be my 100th day. That's usually pretty key marker for what signs of progress we've made in this time. And I have to say, there's no place I would rather be than here at Western Center. It's incredible to be back with the amazing and passionate staff, meeting the moment that we're in. I want to talk about four things broadly today. One is defining that moment that we're in, talking about our roots in this work, explaining a little bit about my vision, and then to talk about what we are doing to meet the moment. So I don't need to tell anyone in this webinar that we are in a very critical time. Whether you are listening or reading the news, every day we're hearing about new devastating and destructive policies that either have an overt or indirect impact on low-income individuals and Black and Brown communities. And we will talk a lot about the federal landscape, but I also want to recognize that what we're doing in our state is a continuation of addressing the myriad problems and issues that California has, especially with low-income communities. So our work there also continues as we widen our focus to also include some of our federal work. So at the federal level, the strategy is chaos. And the strategy is to flood the zone and overwhelm and break the systems that we all took for granted were bedrock, that a lot of the things that we thought were critical pieces of infrastructure are norms that are being broken all the time, every day. And the stories that we hear are often about the most powerful being challenged. And those powerful entities often have the resources to fight, or they have the means to concede to demands so that they can protect their own financial and economic interests. But it's our duty and our privilege to tell the stories of the most impacted with the fewest resources. So the moment that we're in is really built on cruelty, exploitation, and a form of extortion. There is a fantastic article from the Center of Budget and Policy Priorities that talks about the three-pronged offense on low-income communities and communities of color. That really talks about how the legislative budget bill, the cuts to government agencies and services, and the tariffs have a disproportionate and devastating impact on low-income communities. So with the budget bill, we're still in reconciliation, but we are looking to cut hundreds of billions of dollars in safety net programs so that we could pay for tax cuts that primarily benefit the wealthy. Well, I think something very interesting in this article talks about how the tax cuts and the cuts to services will result in a reduction of income for low-income families, particularly the bottom 20% of people will see a 10% decrease in their family's income and wealth. On top of that, we're seeing cuts to government agencies and services, which also serves as a type of bureaucratic disentitlement. So we're seeing this at the Social Security Administration and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, where both real and threatened cuts create a type of stress on the system. So longer wait times, people being unsure whether their subsidies or their benefits are going to be renewed. It is a way to both actually cut the system, but also to make those that rely on those systems feel more unstable, and to take away their rights. And then lastly, the third front of this war is really on tariffs, which doesn't have an immediate obvious impact on low-income communities, but it's the beat after that, you realize how regressive they are with price increases, what it's going to do to the job market. The communities that can afford it least will bear the highest burden. And so what is the impact? Without the means or assistance that people have relied on, that they're entitled to, families and individuals will have a harder time fighting hunger, treating chronic illness, affording housing without subsidies, and the list really goes on. We know throughout our history that cutting programs for the poor does not solve poverty, it actually exacerbates it. In the same way, cutting language about race or diversity, equity, inclusion doesn't address racism, it only exacerbates it. So the times that we are in are unique, not for the cruelty, but for their speed. Our history as a country is really steeped with injustice. Our nation's history is stained with the blood and sweat of generations of Black, Indigenous, and immigrant labor and suffering. And the inequality we see today is really from policy choices over our long histories, policies like redlining or segregated health systems. And scientific racism have led to the types of inequalities that we're seeing today. So these are purposeful policy choices, and we are making further policy choices that will only exacerbate those inequities. So not only have these communities fought very hard in their long history against these policies, we are also enriched and by the movements that they have led to stand in their dignity and their power. So this is why Western Center is here. From the beginning, our mission has been to lift up voices and fight alongside communities for a more just and equitable America. We founded in the aftermath and the days following the Watts Rebellion have been fighting for racial and economic justice for over 58 years. And from the beginning, our earliest cases fought for racial justice and fought desegregation in schools in Inglewood and Oxnard. In the 1980s and 90s, we fought for subsistence, cash, and health benefits to the indigent and people experiencing houselessness. Throughout the Clinton era, we fought waves of welfare reform. And in the early 2000s, we did a lot to strengthen healthcare rights and to protect low-income tenants. So from the beginning of our history to the present, we continue to strengthen state laws and promote the rights of low-income Californians and communities of color. I would say that, if anything, the hallmark of our work is not who we fight against, but who and what we're fighting for. Alongside our clients and partners, Western Center advances access to justice in both state and federal arenas, regardless of administration and regardless of political party. So my vision for us is really building on our legacy and standing on the shoulders of the giants that preceded us. I think it's our honor and our duty to confront the challenges of our time. I see for us very bold action to undo the legacies of injustice and fight for a more inclusive world. So I think that it's really important to remember also that the communities we come from and the communities we serve are relying on us to be courageous, as we have been for nearly 6 decades. What we're working on now is really defining the areas in which we are uniquely positioned to lead. And I want us to have a cohesiveness in the approach, employing all of our advocacy strategies and tools to advance our theory of change. Looking back on this time, I want us to feel proud that we were courageous, creative, and collaborative. So what are we actually doing? I think what surprises a lot of people I talk to about Western Center is how small we are. We're only 35 staff members, and we are mighty, and we are always in action. I started shortly after the LA fires, and without any direction, our teams jumped into providing response and helped the communities in need. And the same thing goes for advocacy here. Many folks are relying on Western Center to employ our multi-pronged advocacy strategy. So I think our advocacy model is very unique and special in that all of our strategy tools are informed by and inform each other. So whether it is impact litigation to enforce or implement legislation, or legislative advocacy to fix holes in the laws that we've identified through lawsuits, working with government agencies through administrative advocacy, or providing training and technical support as a support center, everything we do is in a feedback loop with our partners and the communities we serve, and we think about a problem and all of our different ways to approach that problem, all of the tools at our disposal. I think a really good example is that when we look at the state of the California economy and the California state budget and the volatility with which federal funding is being threatened, there's a great concern about some of the advances that we've made for immigrant healthcare in California. Just last year, we achieved with our partners in the Health for All Coalition an incredible groundbreaking victory that all low-income Californians, regardless of immigration status, could qualify for our state Medicaid program, Medi-Cal. Now, with all of the threats to the immigrant communities and with the budget deficits projected or threatened, programs like this really need champions. And we have been testifying in budget hearings, meeting with the Department of Healthcare Services to do what we can to make sure that those programs are protected. We also provide a tremendous amount of technical assistance and help with other communities and programs that deal directly with the patients who benefit from these programs. So in addition to our multi-pronged strategy, we are also really focusing on investing in our relationships and building our coalitions. I think that Western Center now more than ever is part of an incredible tapestry of coalitions, like the Health for All Coalition I mentioned, the Reimagine CalWORKs, and Equal Rights for Every Neighbor coalitions. Those are just a few of the many groups that we're a part of, because we know that we are not in this alone, that we use our privilege to fight for justice, and we open doors and link arms with programs like ours and community-based organizations to help advance the priorities that we all set together. I also see us recommitting to our role as a support center. As a support center, we are a resource and a partner to both local legal aid programs that provide direct services as well as community-based organizations. Our strength really is in providing that technical expertise, the strategy, partnership in how to both identify and address systemic problems. I also want us to really think about creating narrative change and really laying out what our affirmative vision is for a more just and better future. I think that in times like this, and I would say this is true of 8 years ago, there was so much talk about resistance. And I think not only must we be resilient, we need to also lay the ground for the vision that we are fighting for, not just what we're fighting against. Some particular areas that we are employing our multi-pronged strategy, whether it is impact litigation, our support center work, our administrative advocacy, or legislation, is really around defending Medicaid, looking at the housing rules around immigration, and protecting food benefits through the SNAP program. This is, I feel like, just scratching the surface of what we're thinking about and what we're doing. But I want to pause here and see if there are any thoughts or questions about what we're doing or how I'm thinking about the moment we're in.
We have one question here, Corey, really quick. How, in this moment, how does Western Center balance courage with caution, like especially in policy positions? And you talked about narrative, public messaging. There's, danger in speaking out. So how are we meeting that moment?
Yes, I think that this is a really important question and something that we're learning to navigate as we proceed. I want us always to feel courageous for speaking about how we're advancing our mission that has stood the test of time through various eras and administrations. And that really is to dismantle and transform systems, to fight for racial and economic justice. I think as long as we are talking about those things, we can speak full-heartedly and full-throatedly about what we're trying to achieve and naming the dangers and barriers to achieving that. There are many conversations happening about various threats to charitable organizations, academic institutions, nonprofit organizations. And I think as long as we are being true to our mission and complying by the rules and processes that govern our sector, I feel very confident that we can speak courageously and boldly without fear. Of course, there's always going to be a need for caution in that, and I want us to be judicious, but I also don't want us to be silent or so circumspect that we are not advancing our mission.
We have one more, and then we'll pass it to Brandon. Do you have any strategies, litigation or otherwise, that are being developed in response to the loss of traditional DEI approaches and tools? How is Western Center meeting that DEI need?
I know Brandon's going to talk a little bit more about this, and I won't talk about specific litigation strategies, but I will say that there are in state law enshrined a number of laws and initiatives that promote examining racial disparities and addressing inequities that happen. I think there are some novel legal questions that need to be tested about how to enforce and ensure that those state laws are mandated even in the face of threats to federal funding and to programs that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think baked into our mission is the principles of diversity and equity and inclusion. And I refuse to believe that those can be co-opted for nefarious for nefarious means. I don't want those words to be weaponized because they are so critical to what we're doing. So we are reviewing what state laws and obligations are created that exist, and we want to do our best to lift up that health disparities and discrepancies in lifespan based on zip code are persistent problems that need addressing, and ignoring those problems or erasing race, like I said earlier, only exacerbates those problems.
Great. If we don't have any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Brandon Green. Brandon is our Director of Policy Advocacy. He was previously the Director of the Racial and Economic Justice Program at the ACLU of Northern California and manager of the Civic Design Lab in Oakland. He also served as an attorney and clinical supervisor at the East Bay Community Law Center. He is actively working to dismantle systemic hurdles to racial justice and has long worked on the cutting edge of advancing racial and economic equity. So we're pretty lucky to have him, and I welcome Brandon to the table.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. For my portion, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that were already discussed and kind of just really lay the groundwork for where we are. Of course, there are the attacks on DEI and racial justice, many of which predate the existing administration. And came as a result of the Supreme Court affirmative action case, which is notable in that that case was about higher admissions. And what we have seen is, in my opinion, an expansion of that case and the precedent of that case to apply across a great deal of spaces that it perhaps should not, as opposed to being limited in the ways in which it should. Some of that has been sort of pre-compliance with things. There have certainly been some legal challenges that have been brought forward, but the central question as to how far that particular ruling goes has not been answered. But of course, we have seen both in the nonprofit space and some university spaces and even in some philanthropic spaces, a chilling effect that has been created. And this, of course, is how that side wins, not by the precedent that is set, but rather by the widening compliance. We have seen this exacerbated since the presidential election, with threats to universities and institutions, mainly around not only sort of curbing their programming as it relates to DEI, staffing, and other elements of their work, but also in demanding that they implement a sort of what I would call a different sort of DEI, at least one that they believe is valid. So you see discussion about viewpoint diversity, and you see discussion about protection of certain students and other things, which is, in my opinion, the flip side of the very coin that they have said they are challenging. This is a sort of scary proposition as we look to these institutions that we see as powerful institutions, be they universities or powerful law firms or courts to be the ones who sort of preserve the policies, practices, and systems that we've all come to know. And it is a demonstration that we are in unprecedented times that require sort of unprecedented thought about how we intervene at this moment. We've also seen the canceling of DOJ investigations and consent decrees as it relates to police practices, quashing dissent, canceling student visas. And in California, this exacerbates sort of the existing groundwork that was brought forward by Prop 209, which again placed certain limitations on targeted interventions. But as is the case with the ruling in Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, in both instances, there's been an overcompliance, which has had a chilling effect. It's important to note, too, that California, while it was moving forward with a number of racial justice elements, which I'll get to in a moment, it's still California. And so although it's seen as the sort of big blue progressive state, we know that California has the largest population of people experiencing houselessness, and those people are disproportionately Black and brown. We know that through the Racial Identity Profiling Act, which keeps data on who was pulled over by the police and what actions are taken, that is disproportionately impacting Black and brown folks. And so all of the systems, many of which intersect to create an equity in California, the blue progressive state, have disproportionate impact on Black and brown and low-income communities. Much of what we see happening federally, as I alluded to before, is driven by a sort of nativist frame, which has centered the grievance of one population of folks in policymaking. And this is sort of evident by the coining of phrases like DEI hire, which questions the hiring qualifications of individuals of color, but not the many individuals who've been hired into various positions in the current administration. And this is despite the fact that DEI and the programs associated with it have disproportionately benefited white women. And despite the fact that occupational segregation remains real for communities of color, particularly in California. I say that as an attorney, while the legal profession, for example, means the least diverse industry. And the practical impact of all of this is not only are the small, hard-fought gains being unraveled in real time, but the very large gains from the civil rights movement are being dismantled in real time. And as I alluded to, many of the institutions, some of which had not adequately either protected or advanced justice for communities of color in the first place, are also being dismantled or reworked to further harm. There's been a lot written about how various folks are standing up in this particular moment. And I think this is important to note as to the question that was asked of Corey, which is, in my experience, both before coming to Western Center and now, there is a sort of a thread on the sort of progressive legal side as to what kind of cases to bring, a fear of setting bad precedent, a fear of making bad law, and really showing that every box is checked in order to bring a litigation. We have seen that that's not really been the case on the other side, where all of the things that I learned in law school around standing, around precedent, around what is a good case, what are the necessary elements of it, have sort of been upended. And so that is recognition of, again, us being in unprecedented times. These are not the same social political times that we were living in before, and so it will require us to think differently about bringing sort of novel challenges. I'd also note that, one of the lessons that I think California and other folks on the left are wrongly taken from the election is to lean into policy positions that would placate and peel off voters who tend to lean more center right. And you see that in policy. So California not only failed to pass the proposition that would have barred involuntary servitude in California, but also unraveled Prop 47. And so I sit here having been in Assembly Public Safety this morning, where there was a great deal of what I would say is bad criminal justice bills introduced. I think on a week-to-week basis are probably submitting, have been submitting maybe half a dozen, if not more, support or opposition letters outside of the bills that we co-sponsor. We have seen a sort of fear in terms of being very explicit around racial justice work, even as we have entities like the Racial Equity Commission, which we are part of the Racial Equity Coalition, which is seeking to influence that commission and its design of a racial equity tool. I already mentioned the RIPA board, which for years has been collecting data on police stops and the racialization of those, but has yet to really be able to implement significant amount of change there. We've had the Racial Justice Act, which made it so that you could challenge racial bias at any point in a criminal case. There has been a bill introduced to sort of curb some of that, as well as bill to introduced to curb the protection that one has as a juror, saying that you've had negative experiences with police officers. And so it's not just sort of an expansion of the criminal legal system, but it's really been some bills introduced to unravel many of the gains of years of organizing. And I would say that, this sort of all comes to what comes to the forefront is both the Overton window has been expanded in terms of political talking points that would have thought to have not gained legitimacy previously. For example, attacks on birthright citizenship, even floating the idea of jailing citizens who've been convicted of a crime in foreign prisons. And even legal arguments that would have seemed dead on arrival are being advanced. And as I alluded to before, progressive legal advocates are still operating as if the norms and institutions remain the same. And we're still being held back by ideas like setting bad precedent and bad case law, which the other side does not seem to be burdened by. But we are also engaging in the necessary work of moving forward. I ran to hop on this Meet the Advocates after leaving a press conference that I was lucky enough to speak at for AB7, which we are a co-sponsor of, which is a bill introduced by Assembly Member Bryan, which would allow higher institutions to allow for preferential admissions for descendants of chattel slavery. So I was lucky enough to both participate in that press conference. We'll be testifying on that bill in about an hour. I was lucky enough to testify before the Reparations Task Force. We are in support of a number of repair bills that are also being introduced. Tomorrow, another bill that we are co-sponsoring around decriminalization of homelessness will be being heard, and there's a significant number of other bills that we are either co-sponsoring or actively supporting, which is noted in the legislation tracker in the chat. And I think I will pause there.
Thank you, Brandon. That's a lot and it's pretty impressive. I have a couple questions for you, and then I think we have a couple that'll bounce back to Corey. So, how is Western Center dealing with the chilling effect that you mentioned? And in what ways is the organization intervening to make sure the laws are followed or to combat the unraveling? That's the first one.
Sure. So I think in part, the way that we are doing that is continuing to do the work that we've been doing in the coalition spaces that we are a part of. I mentioned the Racial Equity Coalition, which is specifically for ensuring that the tool that is released by the Racial Equity Commission will be one that is useful for ensuring that the outcome of racial equity is achieved. And so in that coalition, we've met individually with the individual commissioners. We give public comment at each of the commission hearings. We've submitted letters with recommendations, et cetera. As I mentioned, we are in support of a number of the repair bills, including AB 7, which very likely, if passed, will result in a legal challenge, which Assemblymember Bryan is inviting. So as to answer this question, it should be noted in that Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard case, in one portion of that case, Clarence Thomas mentioned the Freedmen Affairs Agency and the fact that the establishment of that to serve folks who were part of chattel slavery and others was racially neutral on its face, and even as a proxy would be an underrepresented proxy for Black folks. And so arguments around this sort of thing being race-based, I think, fail. But the fact that we're a co-sponsor of that bill, I think, is huge in sort of advancing both novel legal theory as well as solutions to move needle forward. Similarly, as I mentioned, there's a number of on-ramps to houselessness, the criminal legal system. We are part of the Debt Free Justice Coalition, which has done a lot of work around criminal fines and fees and really coined the phrase racialized wealth extraction to talk about the ways in which government entities extract wealth from low-income communities of color. And that's not even touching on the work of our health team around disparities in Black maternal health and a number of other sort of things in the housing space as well. And so we are not doing this work alone, but we're doing it in coalition, and we are making sure that we adhere to our mission by being explicit as to our work being racial justice as well as economic justice. And that is also sort of influenced some of the things that we take positions on. We were asked to take position on a bill around the impact of tariffs, for example, and we're lucky enough to submit comments about the study bill to ensure that the study bill would include sort of disaggregated data as it relates to various communities in California, because we know if the price of groceries grow up, or the price of consumer products grow up, who's going to disproportionately impact, for example. And that was not something that was present or going to be present in that bill before we mentioned it.
Great, that's fabulous. The second question for you, Brandon, was kind of part of what you already answered about collaborations. Through collaborations, the broader advocacy ecosystem is aligning. Is there other ways that we can kind of build momentum with the greater advocacy ecosystem?
I think one of the ways, at least I've been having conversations with folks about in terms of amplifying reach is, as I mentioned, you take a broad topic like houselessness. Um, that is the effect of the intersection of a lot of different things: the criminal legal system, the housing supply, rent burden, police contact, all these different things. And so you have some folks who work in the housing space, but they end up not really being in conversation with folks in the criminal justice space as they should be. We have some folks who work on homelessness, but they're not in the spaces around economic justice or the criminal legal system. All of these things have a health impact. And so you don't have folks in those spaces. So recently we were able to help organize and be part of a sort of health equity roundtable and invited folks in that space to think about sort of broadening the coalitions that they're in to join some of the criminal justice spaces and other spaces that we are in. I think a real good example of this, as I mentioned, we have a bill that we're sponsoring around criminalization of houselessness that will be heard tomorrow. And the sign-ons in support of that bill that we got are across a number of spaces because ourselves and other co-sponsors sent it to various listservs that generally would not be interfacing with each other. And that's how we start to amplify not only the work, but the reach of the work and really start to tackling issues in a very intersectional way instead of silos, which don't necessarily happen on purpose, but people see their expertise in this one thing. But when you take something like houselessness, for example, it's going to take the expertise of people across spaces to actually solve.
Great, thank you, Brandon. We have a couple of questions here for Corey. Corey, many public health applicants and beneficiaries are reluctant to apply and receive public benefits because the county welfare departments either forces them to go to the Social Security office where they, ICE might pick them up or their information is transmitted. So is there any proposed action being taken to assure that those referrals are only made when required by law? Are we able to address that issue to protect our constituents?
It's a great question and such a good flag for how insidious these, even the proposal of policies are. It has such a chilling effect. We are seeing absolutely horrendous actions being taken against immigrants, both real and threatened. And we saw this chilling effect 8 years ago as well. Back then, as we are now, we are in conversation with many government agencies at the state and county level to talk about privacy and what's required to transmit to the federal government, if anything at all. And Brandon may be able to speak about specific budget or bill asks, but we have fairly strong California privacy protections that we are seeking to enforce. We are also thinking about the ways in which we can help protect access and to address some of the fears that immigrant communities are facing and keeping them from accessing healthcare and accessing justice. For example, earlier this year, Western Center authored a letter to the California Supreme Court asking them not to allow ICE enforcement in courthouses. And that was signed on by over 35 other legal aid organizations. So we're working on this issue. I don't think that there is a perfect solution, especially for certain things that do have federal funding attached to it. But we want to prevent the wholesale turning over of data that we're seeing federal agencies agree to do.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, that's important. We have one other question. California, do you think that Western Center will ever prioritize what Senator Sheldon Whithouse and many other political scientists say about money campaign finance reform, Citizens United, things like that. I'm not sure that's what the question is.
So this is
Yeah.
a bit beyond our focus area in what our core work is, which is really access to housing, healthcare, public benefits, and justice. I will say that it has been a incredibly terrible descent into very moneyed politics to see that corporations have more powerful and stronger voices in elections than actual people. And so to that extent, I lament the Supreme Court ruling in Citizens United. We don't work on election issues or campaign finance reform, however. When possible, we think about mandatory arbitration clauses, but we don't often, well, actually, I'm not sure about that. I don't know, Brandon, if you have any thoughts about systemic arbitration, fraud, or mandatory arbitration clauses.
I have thoughts, but I don't think that that is the work that we engage in. I mean, certainly there are conversations that happen that we sometimes engage in that have specific elements of litigation or things that we see as either expanding or restricting access to justice. Um, I mentioned, you know, the ability to be to serve on a jury and be able to honestly say, I've had bad experiences with police officers, but that doesn't make me biased, and I shouldn't be removed from a jury for that. Right? There are things that we engage in on the civic engagement side, but as much as I wish that we had the power to unravel Citizens United, for example, we don't. There are other talented attorneys and policy people working on those things, and I would politely push back against Senator Whitehouse as those being the most pertinent issues, or I think that they are important. I think when almost 50% of people experiencing houselessness in America are Black folks, and then much larger when you add other communities of color. That sort of thing happening in a country as prosperous as our country, and the amount of money that is spent on elections versus housing and feeding folks and having a real robust public safety net are the things that should be worked on, and we're lucky enough to be working on those things.
Great. Thank you, Brandon and Corey. We have another question. This is probably for Corey. How are you keeping yourselves and your staff resourced for the fight? Great question.
I think this is a great question. It has long been my philosophy that the work we do is a privilege and it's very challenging, but it isn't sustainable or possible if we aren't, as warriors for social justice and change, are not taking care of ourselves in the process. We just had an extraordinary staff retreat last week in which we really thought about the ways in which we work and asked ourselves the question, how can we create a community of care? What do we need as individuals? What do we need to do as an organization? How does that fit into the broader movement? I take great solace in the fact that we are part of a broader tapestry of organizations fighting for similar things, and that we don't always need to be at the forefront of every moment in every fight, that we do this in solidarity with many other organizations. So we're thinking a lot about how to create those communities of care. and encouraging people as much as possible to really take care of themselves so that we can sustain our efforts to make a difference.
Could I just jump in quickly just to of course give a shout out to everyone on the staff of Western Center. In particular, I wanted to shout out all the policy advocates, just because this week and next week are going to be extremely um, busy, and while we definitely try to be particularized in the things that we co-sponsor, for example, I really can't say enough about the amount of bills that have been introduced this year, even with the sort of limitations that were supposed to have been put in place. Um, and yesterday at our Sacramento team meeting, we talked about coverage for today, because just this morning, for example, there was Assembly Judiciary happening 30 minutes before public safety in one area was happening, which was about 30 minutes or an hour before public safety was happening on the other side, and judiciary is supposed to be scheduled somewhere else. There were so many bills that were up, even after sort of discussing at the team meeting coverage and how to make it all work. We still were in a text thread to make sure that happened, and asking each other to give me tools in the places they could be. I had to leave to go to the press conference, and so I had to ask my colleague from the Criminal Justice Coalition to give me tools on my behalf, and then ask someone else to testify on a bill that I won't be to testify on, because I'll testify on another one. And so there's a great deal of things happening at the legislature, but I just wanted to shout out the policy advocates for really sort of circling around each other to make sure that we can be in 10 places at one time, because it's a lot, and that's not even to think about all the breaking news that is coming into people's phones. So folks are trying. I try to take care of myself with really bougie coffee, which I'm overdue for today. So.
Great. Thanks, Brandon. And we're going to close out here. We just have a few minutes, so we'll hand it over to Corey, and then I'll give you some final instructions at the end.
I want to really thank everyone for joining us today. And I really want to echo Brandon's gratitude to the incredible Western Center staff. To a person, each one of us is here because we love the work, because we care about each other, and because we really believe in the mission. And I am so lucky. I feel so lucky and happy to be back at Western Center. I couldn't, as I said at the beginning, I couldn't imagine a better place to be in this moment, to fight for our values as an organization and to advance our mission. I also really want to thank the community of our partners that work with us. I know many of them have joined today. We wouldn't really be able to do this work without your partnership, both in thought and action, and that solidarity means everything to us. And I also want to thank the Western Center Board. Their support and their belief in the organization is so enduring, and it's very inspiring. And I think it really empowers us to have the freedom to do great work. So in closing, just want to express my really heartfelt gratitude to everyone for joining us today, for being with us in the fight, and for helping us make a difference.
Thanks so much, Corey. And thank you, everybody, Brandon, Corey, and our behind the scenes guru, Nora, for putting this together and keeping everything on track. As put in the chat, you can join us on our website to find out more. The legislative trackers is in the chat, the link for that. You can also find us on various social media channels, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Blue Sky, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also find a recording of this Meet the Advocates on our YouTube page, and we'll be posting that shortly. So you'll be able to rewind, play it there, and kind of reinforce what we're saying today. So thank you again, and we appreciate all of your attendance.